the election were held today, that Donald Trump would win. Of course, we're 11 months away from the election, and that's an eternity in this business. But certainly the trend lines are for Donald Trump right now and against Joe Biden. And Joe Biden's biggest difficulty is that the biggest knock against him is his age. And while he can change his policy on Gaza, change his policy on inflation, it's very difficult to change one's policy on your own age. So that will be something he struggles with for the next 10 or 11 months.
Trump's team have said they will appeal to the US Supreme Court against the ruling by Colorado's Supreme Court that the former president should be banned from the state's primary election ballot paper. While the ruling applies to the primary vote in March, if it stands, it would also apply to the presidential election in November. The court declared he'd engaged in an insurrection by stoking the riot at the US Capitol on January the 6th, 2021. It makes Trump the first presidential candidate in US history to be deemed ineligible by a state to run for the White House. Well, Trump spoke at a campaign event in Iowa shortly after the Colorado court's ruling.
Every time the radical left Democrats, Marxists, communists, and fascists indict me, I consider it actually a great badge of honor. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Because I'm being indicted for you. Never forget, our enemies want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. It's very simple. I'm not going to let them do it. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. And in the end, they're not after me, they're after you. I just happen to be standing in their way, and I always will stand in their way.
Well, that was Donald Trump speaking at a campaign rally. But what next for the legal process? Philip Lacovara is a former US Solicitor General. He was also counsel to the Watergate Special Prosecutor. Philip, good evening to you.
Good evening.
What happens next with this legal process?
Well, it's temporarily on hold because the Colorado Supreme Court has given Donald Trump a chance to apply to the U.S. Supreme Court for review. And if he doesn't do that, this decision will take effect. But everyone expects that Trump, both as part of his campaign and as part of his legal strategy to keep the ball spinning, will apply to the Supreme Court quickly for review.
And given that when Donald Trump was at the White House, he essentially tried to pack as many of his supporters into the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, as possible, do you think it is likely that the federal court will overturn this Colorado ruling?
I think, while it's a close call, and I think most serious legal scholars consider it a close call, I do think that the judicial philosophy of the justices whom Trump appointed probably will cut against his view because their stated constitutional philosophy is what's called originalism or textualism. And if you look at the text of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution and the context in which it was adopted after the American Civil War, it tends to support the argument that somebody who has engaged in the conduct that Trump is found to have engaged in is ineligible because he, having taken an oath to support the Constitution, later supported insurrection against it. And the 14th Amendment says that any person in that category is ineligible to hold any civil office under the United States.
So it is quite possible that the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, could actually uphold this ruling from Colorado. And we know that other states are also considering similar applications.
Yes, interestingly, a number of other states have reached the opposite conclusion on one ground or another. One argument is, well, it really isn't the business of the state administration officials, the electoral officials, to decide how this constitutional clause should be interpreted. That should be left to somebody else, and they don't exactly say who it is. Sometimes they say, well, the president isn't a civil officer within the meaning of the Constitution, although I think that's a bit of a stretch. Others say, well, he didn't take the same kind of oath to support the Constitution that the framers of this amendment may have had in mind. That also seems to me to be a bit of a stretch historically and textually. So a number of states, I think, are plainly motivated by the political consequences, and I don't necessarily mean partisan, but I just mean political in the in the traditional sense of a ruling that disqualifies Trump from the ballot and leaves his 60 million or so voters, potential voters, in limbo. And that is arguably anti-democratic because people who want him to run or be able to run will not have that choice. Now, I think there are good arguments against that, but
Yeah.
it's one reason why a number of states and conceivably some justices on the Supreme Court have said we're not going to apply this provision to Trump.
Philip Lacavara, former US Solicitor General, really good to hear your thoughts on this. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carol.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Mick Mulvaney, who is a former chief of staff to Donald Trump, and he told me what he thought this ruling would mean for the former president.
He's probably more likely to be the next president of the United States. I know that sounds bizarre, but let me try and walk through that. Donald Trump has done a masterful job for the last 6 or 8 months of making himself out to be a victim of a politicized governmental apparatus, that the government is out to get him both at the federal level and the state level. And this Colorado state decision last night plays right into that. He's managed to turn all the other criminal charges against him to his advantage. And he's already today starting to turn this decision to Colorado to keep him off the ballot next year to his political advantage as well. And I fully expect him to continue his arc towards the presidency.
Now, his team have already made it clear that they're going to appeal to the US Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court. I mean, how does it look? Is it likely to be overturned, or is there a real possibility that Donald Trump, the former president, of course, could be kept off the ballot paper in Colorado?
I'll answer the second question first. It doesn't really make a difference politically if he's on or off in Colorado, because he had no chance of winning Colorado anyway. It's a Democrat-leaning state. It used to be a swing state a decade ago, but it's now more Democratic, and there's very little chance of him winning there anyway. So regardless of that, it doesn't change the outcome. That being said, I do think there's a very good chance the Supreme Court of the United States will overturn this for a variety of reasons that are probably not of much interest to your audience, have to do with our Civil War and the way our Constitution is drafted and so forth. But what I'm hearing today from even some of my Democrat friends is there's a chance that might be a 9-0 decision in Trump's favor at the Supreme Court. That would be a rare bipartisan win for Trump in the courts. And in fact, a rare 9-0 decision for our Supreme Court. So we'll watch it very closely, as will everybody else.
And of course, if that does happen, if there is a decisive vote in the US Supreme Court in Donald Trump's favor, I mean, that will just fuel his arguments that there's this big conspiracy within the whole justice system against him.
And look, like I said, the left continues to give him fuel for his argument that he is a victim. This began with the Manhattan case regarding the so-called hush money payments to the porn star Stormy Daniels. Such a weak case that even his Democrat detractors, some of them came to his defense. The same thing is happening today. There's even elected Democrats saying they thought this was a bad decision. Even critics of the president, as you know, I criticize the president from time to time. I'm not shy about doing that. I've been defending him. This is such a one-sided decision that doesn't seem to be justified, that it's doing nothing but helping Donald Trump.
This Colorado ruling, though, does say effectively that Donald Trump was responsible for insurrection back in the days of that riot outside the Capitol building. And there are other states that are looking at a similar mechanism to try to keep him off the ballot paper, aren't there?
There are. And if one of those states would be a swing state or even a Republican-leaning state, that would certainly be noteworthy. Keep in mind, he's not even been charged with insurrection in the federal case against him in Washington, D.C., the highest profile of all the cases, the one that's related to the January 6th riots. The one that's being brought by the federal government in Washington, D.C., does not charge him with insurrection. So not only has he not been convicted of that anywhere in the country, he's not even been charged with that anywhere in the country. That's one of the weaknesses many legal scholars are pointing to in the Colorado state decision. Of course, there's other things on the other side of the decision. The Colorado people are not stupid. They're not bad lawyers. There's certainly things that justify their decision. But at the end of the day, the general consensus in Washington on both sides of the aisle seems to be that this will be set aside.
So even if it's not, it sounds as though he can get by without Colorado. And what happens next, Mick? We have got to go through this process of choosing the Republican candidate for the presidential election. But at the moment, Donald Trump is just so far ahead, isn't he?
Well, he is. And, I'm friends with Nikki Haley. I'm friends with Ron DeSantis as two leading challengers. And while I haven't talked to them today, I know they have to be pulling their hair out thinking, what do we have to do to get some attention? Donald Trump seems to get all of the free media coverage that exists in this country. So it's going to be very difficult for them to catch up. In fact, they've been to the extent they have been in the media today, they've been in the media today because they are defending Donald Trump. And it's very hard to beat somebody that you are defending. So, no, it's been very rough to challenge Donald Trump. He has done much better than I expected. Again, he's probably 20 points, Carol, higher in the Republican primary voting than he was 6 months ago when the first criminal charges came down. It's just uncanny. We've never seen anything like it. But that's not the first time we've used those words to describe Donald Trump.
And just finally, we've also seen those polls in some of the key swing states suggesting, that he could actually beat Joe Biden, assuming that Joe Biden does continue to stand for the Democrats in the presidential election. So we could see a return of Donald Trump to the White House.
Well, I think if the election were held today, that Donald Trump would win. Of course, we're 11 months away from the election, and that's an eternity in this business. But certainly the trend lines are for Donald Trump right now and against Joe Biden. And Joe Biden's biggest difficulty is that the biggest knock against him is his age. And while he can change his policy on Gaza, change his policy on inflation, it's very difficult to change one's policy on your own age. So that will be something he struggles with for the next 10 or 11 months.
Well, that was Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff to Donald Trump, speaking to me just a little earlier.